In today's video, we're going to talk about the darkness of the withdrawal process, the forms that it can take, and ways to combat it. Stay tuned, I think you'll find this useful.
Who are you living for? What are they asking for? Trying to be everyone's favorite, weighs you down every day while you parade in the frenzy. Be careful not to run far from home.
Hello everyone and welcome back to The Lovely Grind. My name is Michael Preby and my website's lovelygrind.com. That's where you can find out how to connect with me in coaching. That's where you can register for my online courses or sign up for my Support and Success monthly membership area. So I hope you'll check out lovelygrind.com, and I welcome you back to this channel and to today's video, which is about the darkness of the withdrawal process, the different forms that it takes specifically, and how to fight back against those forms of darkness by allowing some very needed light to shine into your process. So to recap my story, I was on Paxil and Xanax for more than a dozen years, put on those for anxiety and panic, and then I made a decision to get off those around my mid-30s. And when I did, I was hit by a very severe withdrawal, and I didn't know what to make of it, especially as time went on. It was very fatiguing and scary and difficult to continue to see that process of healing through, but I did, and I got past it and found healing, and I make these videos to share that and to share tips with all of you who might still be working through a tapering process or an ongoing healing process after trying to get off antidepressant or benzo medications or what have you. So specifically, today we're going to talk about the darkness of the withdrawal process. And if you are going through it, or if you've been through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. As a matter of fact, that word could perhaps be used to describe the process. Darkness. Right? It's very confusing, like you're fumbling around in the dark. It's also very frightening, like forces of darkness are descending upon you. And it can also feel a bit like a void of identity, where you're not really connected to who you felt you were, and you're not sure how to get to where you want to be. So darkness, that could in fact describe the process, but the types of darkness I'm going to talk about today are threefold. I'm going to talk about the internal darkness, some of those symptoms and intrusions that try to tug at a person's attention and confuse you and bring your mood down and bring your anxiety up. I'm going to talk about the darkness that exists out there online. And there's a lot of it, and it's always been there, and it's never going away, because the online world is a dark place in many respects, and this topic specifically seems to allow that darkness to seep in rather easily into content. And I'm also going to talk about spiritual attack, the darkness of that. And I can tell you there are many, many times where I just felt as if I was under demonic attack, and I truly believe in the concept of spiritual warfare, that we're living in a reality we can't always see with our eyes, and that curtain is really pulled back, I believe, when a person's going through the process of getting off these medications. And in a very real sense, it's a spiritual battleground, I believe, going on for our very souls and our very faith. Very hard to maintain faith during this process. So those are the types of darkness I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about some ways that we can let the light into those dark areas so that we can maintain hope and focus on the right things and keep moving forward and healing. First, let's talk about the internal darkness, which can take the form of a negative inner voice, an inner critic, which is tearing a person down and telling you what you're doing wrong or what you did wrong, or that everything's always going to be wrong. It can take the form of perpetual doubt, a perpetually doubting inner critic. It can take the form of very severe emotional struggles. I had very severe depression and feelings of dread, especially when I came off the Paxil. And it can take the form of a scattered mind and a frazzled system that anxiety has wreaked havoc upon. And you feel that in various ways, the sensitivity to stress and that heightened anxiety. So these are the internal struggles that a person deals with, and a lot of it It really feels internal, doesn't it? We're always focused on ourselves in the withdrawal process to the point where it's so hard to feel connected to anyone else or to anything else. So a part of the remedy for that, a part of the light which can come into that and overwhelm that and chip away at that darkness, is indeed support, and the support of others and the voices of others who are uplifting and encouraging and help you to find reassurance and perspective. We can't just leave ourselves to our own internal devices this entire process. Yes, it takes a resolute personality and a lot of inner strength to see this process through, but each and every one of us also needs others to lift us up and guide us at times, and to cut away at some of that darkness, to shine their light into it. And that's one important way then that we can remedy that internal darkness, is by allowing the voices and support of others into our situation, and allowing their love and compassion into our situation, their reassurance into our mind and into our heart. And that's going to allow us to not feel as if we're only sitting alone with our own negative thoughts and negative voices and negative emotions all the time. And another way to combat that internal darkness, which can really drag a person down into pits of shame and despair and self-loathing, is to work at developing a positive inner voice. Tell yourself something good about yourself each day, and also work on trying to imagine what your good future is like. Because again, these symptoms are not permanent, and they're not a signal that something's going wrong, but they are unfortunate but rather predictable parts of a temporary but beneficial process, a healing process that's bringing you to a better future. So if the present seems very dark for you, try to imagine something in the future that's good, something you'll be doing when you feel better, a benefit that you'll experience and receive when you're off these medications and when healing happens to greater and greater degrees. So those are really 2 tips to combat that internal darkness. 1, to allow your support system to come into the picture, and 2, to imagine visions of your better future. And to, while you're doing that, also boost yourself up through affirmations and through positive self-talk. The second form of darkness I'll talk about is the darkness that exists online. And this is a rather touchy topic sometimes, and it's a rather nuanced, I guess, definition of darkness, because oftentimes it's rather insidiously packaged with information that is presented as beneficial or educational, right? And when you're going through this process, you certainly need to learn what's going on and give a name to what you're going through and find out you're not the only one going through it. These are all benefits of people sharing their stories, or forums and so forth, where people exchange comments and anecdotes about what they're going through. But at the same time, and if you're going through this withdrawal process, you know what I'm talking about. It's so easy to become triggered, right? There's such an easy stress response, a super easy anxiety trigger, and you might hear 10 good things in a day, but all it takes is one to stick in your head and sow seeds of doubt. And you ruminate upon that thing, and you start thinking about what someone else said online rather than the reality of just what you're doing to move yourself forward in your own situation, right? So yes, the process is difficult, and it can come with many symptoms, and I've shared a lot about what I've experienced, and I never deny that, right? But then there is also an attitude surrounding the presentation of some of this information. And it always needs to be accompanied by hope and by practical take-home tips for how to move through this. And in fact, as I've said this before, you don't even want to be focusing on anything related to withdrawal and symptoms and medications 24/7 as you're going through this, because your brain and your emotions simply can't take that, right? You need to diversify your focus. But yeah, the darkness online, it doesn't mean everyone's trying to be dark, but oftentimes that's just how it ends up being presented. And as a matter of fact, there are some people who I think are trying to be dark because they only put the worst of their situation out there, and they never come back on to talk about an improvement. Or maybe they're not very intentional at all about why they're putting what they're putting out there in the form of video or blog posts, and they don't really think about how it might affect others and then ripple into the psyche and emotions of others in a positive or negative way. But there's a lot of focus on symptoms and a lot of catastrophizing, and again, a lot of snapshots of a process where, yes, you can always focus on this snapshot of a symptom or difficulty at this point in time, but there's a lot bigger picture to present, and that's a whole lot more important to focus on. So a person has to, A, diversify their focus, so you're not only watching and listening to things about withdrawal and symptoms. B, if something is persistently causing you anxiety, some website or some YouTube channel or some forum or whatever, recognize that and step away. And C, make sure that you have productive and uplifting voices and ideas you're putting in your head each and every day to shine light onto your process, rather than just listening to or watching things that seem very dark, right? I mean, there's a reason why, as you're going through this process, you don't want to be reading books about serial killers or watching horror movies or watching UFC fighting, or watching movies about the horrors of the Holocaust or about war. I mean, these things are real. They exist. No one's saying they don't, but it is not what you need to be focusing on in order to protect what you have going on psychologically and emotionally and spiritually as far as this healing process is concerned. So just be mindful and make sure you're giving yourself a healthy, uplifting, productive mental diet, in addition to blocking out some of the things that are repeat offenders as far as causing you anxiety, stress, or sowing seeds of doubt. That's the other form the darkness can take, perpetually sowing seeds of doubt, saying if you do this, you're not going to heal, or you have to do this or you're never going to heal. And therefore, there's seeds of doubt just being sowed perpetually in your head to the point where you feel paralyzed and you don't even know how to move forward anymore. There's just too many suggestions out there, too much information out there, and that can weigh very heavily upon a person. So I guess the bottom line would be to block out some of the noise, simplify the picture for yourself, find what works for you to move forward, and then make sure you're giving yourself a healthy, uplifting, productive, and diversified mental diet each day. And the final form of darkness I'll touch upon today is the spiritual darkness that can come upon a person in this process. And again, if you've gone through it, or if you are going through it, you've no doubt felt it, whether you consider yourself a religious or spiritual person or not. There are pits of despair and images of horror and fear and psychological twists that are simply so demonic. They're simply so destructive and so frightening that from where else could they come except forces that are really not of this human race, right? It's so difficult sometimes to get through those sorts of symptoms that I know no other way to do it than to rely on the light and love and hope that God provides as a remedy, and to know that He's surrounding you, as are His angels, and protecting you, and His healing is ever present for you. So I'll just share a couple of examples as far as this demonic torture. One, and in my case, in the case of many people I've coached, it takes the form of rumination on past mistakes, real or perceived, past sins, real or perceived, just a rumination to the point where there's just pits of shame and self-loathing and feelings of being unforgivable or unlovable. I mean, I remember getting off of these medications, and again, I'm in my mid-30s and then into my later 30s, and my mind is immediately flashing back, 20 years to something that happened in high school or something that happened in college and something I felt ashamed of. And it would just focus on it to the point where I just felt totally unlovable or unredeemed. And, finally, I remember going to church one Sunday morning as I was going through this, and I had worked up the courage to ask a pastor after the service, what could I do about this? Or maybe I had written him an email. And I said, what can I do about these feelings of just like being unforgiven, these ruminations on past mistakes? And well, he just said you have to accept God's forgiveness. And at the time, I was rather angered a little bit by the simplicity or what I perceived to be thoughtlessness of it. I'm like, oh, well, he doesn't understand the depths of this and so forth. We get kind of easily angered sometimes when we think others don't understand what we're going through in withdrawal. But at the end of the day, his advice was correct. That was all I had to do. Right? God offers forgiveness. If you're a Christian, you believe that forgiveness comes through Jesus and his redemptive acts. So that's the reality there. But then the second part of the process is you have to accept that, or you're never going to experience the peace that forgiveness gives. And it really is that simple. And another important thing to remember, those feelings of shame and guilt, etc., are magnified 1,000-fold as you're going through this. So, you're not as bad as you think you are. God loves you, he forgives you, and you can move forward. A lot of what you're going through is a distortion. Remember that to keep a little inner peace as well. So that's one example, like that rumination on past sins or perceived sins or mistakes, feelings of worthlessness or unlovability, and what leads to hopelessness more than feeling unloved or unredeemable. The other example I'll share is just like these distortions of perception that are fear-based. I mean, I guess this is kind of related, but I can remember as I was going through the withdrawal process, going to an opera with my parents and my wife. Not the sort of thing I went to often, but I do enjoy the theater. So we went to this opera, and I cannot, for the life of me remember what it was. But I remember, number one, we had seats that were kind of high up. So I was experiencing like a lot of dizziness and feelings of being imbalanced, and I don't even like heights to begin with, so that came into play. And then in addition to that, there was like this chorus that would appear and that was singing, throughout the work, and I would hear this chorus singing, and I felt as if they were like singing directly to me and pointing out my sins and like condemning me. And it was just the most bizarre thing, but by no means was this unusual at that time, things like that. But who can you talk to about those things at the time? I couldn't just turn to my parents and say, yeah, this work of opera is pretty good, but I think these people are actually demons and they're pointing out my sins, and no one else is seeing it. So that's part of, again, why I think it's important to have a support system that you can trust to talk to about some of these things, and also journaling is important. But at the end of the day, that's not the light that needs to shine into this situation the most. The light that needs to shine in is God's light, because that's greater than all. Like, there certainly are demonic forces at play in this universe and in this world. I sincerely believe that. The Bible certainly doesn't soft soap that reality, but it also points to the fact that we need to stay focused on the greater power and the greater protection and the greater love of God. So that's the biggest light, I think, that needs to shine into all this darkness. And I encourage even those of you who don't feel overly religious or spiritual right now to take some of these signals seriously. And if you feel certain things that seem spiritual in nature, maybe a tug towards learning more or exploring more about spiritual life, take that seriously and use this as an opportunity. I think this can just be, again, a very difficult situation with regards to spiritual symptoms, but also it can be very fertile ground for exploration and strengthening of faith. So I encourage people to use it for that. My name is Michael Preby. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you'll visit, again, lovelygrind.com, and you can find out how to connect with me in coaching or sign up for my membership area and my courses, which I hope are a source of light for people in this process. I'm glad you watched this whole video if you're still here at this point. I hope you click thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. And I invite you to come back for future videos and remind you, until next time, to take care of yourself and your dreams.